would like to call? Thank you. Martina, will you call roll call, please?
Certainly. Member Goins,
Here.
Member Burke,
Here.
Member Finn. It's not here yet. Member Weber,
Here, thank you.
Member Schwartz,
No problem.
Here.
Chair Kurtz.
Here.
And we know that President Rodoni is not currently here.
And I'm Catherine Donahue is alternate for Mr. Rodoni.
Thank you so much for that, Member Donahue.
Thank you, Kathy, for being here.
Mhm.
All right. Open time for, I guess, any agenda adjustments? No. Open time for public expression. I don't see anyone in the public attending. Am I missing, right? All right. No public, no expression. Got it. All right, and we're at the consent calendar. Everyone have a chance to review the only item that's on consent with the minutes? There are no questions. Happy to take a motion.
Motion to approve the minutes, please.
Second.
First by Bruce, second by Stephen. Roll call, please.
Member Goins,
Aye.
Member Donahue,
Aye.
Member Burke,
Aye.
Member Finn. It's not currently here yet. Member Weber,
Sorry, I was dueling meetings there. Yes.
Member Schwartz,
Yes.
and Chair Kurtz.
Yes, thank you. All righty. Moving on to executive officers report.
Good morning, everybody. I'll keep this super brief. As you know, we've had some very moderate weather coming into September and October, which is fantastic news, and it has moderated fire behavior throughout the state. Looking at the fuel moistures, the 10 and 100-hour fuel moistures, trending above average for almost 2 weeks now. So that's really good news. Fire behavior and our fire activity in Marin has been fairly light. We did have a couple acre fire near Mill Valley's Corte Madera boundary, an effective response and also effective unified command between law enforcement and fire. They used a underutilized tactic, in my opinion, for evacuation, and that is shelter in place. And they did send out messaging for the residents and impacted to shelter in place, and it worked very well. Shelter in place allows our fire vehicles to make ingress to the incident when we feel that it is safe for the residents to stay at home with their windows closed, so on and so forth. So every little fire we have is actually an excellent opportunity to train on the unified command concepts that those lessons learned carry forward into the bigger picture. And with that, I'll take any questions. Super brief today.
Any questions? Board members? I think we're all enjoying the fall weather.
Yeah.
We do have now somebody in the public. Thank you, Larry. Okay. We'll move on. Action items. Who's taking this one?
Lisa will start and then I'll wrap up.
Okay, thanks, Mark, for the report. That's all good news. And before I start, I just wanted to introduce Lauren Wolf. She's here. Some of you may have met her. She brings checks for you to sign. She is the financial assistant at Southern Fire, and she's doing a great job. And I thought this meeting might help her just understand her role with the MWPA better. So here she is, Lauren Wolf.
Thank you.
And
Hi, everyone.
And then to my report, this is the first such report really I've done for the MWPA. And because we had the core program this past year, it was a new exercise to be reconciling the rollovers for all of those projects. And also we've learned a few things with that, and we're instituting a few more things to be more in touch with the member agencies, so the year-end close is more seamless. And so last year, the bottom line, it finished with a $3.8 million surplus. And we're a $3.8 million surplus. The expenditures were below budget by 4.5 million. And we are proposing to roll over 4.4 of that. And you can see on page 11, 10 and 11, those charts, what made up the underspending and what we propose rolling over into this fiscal year. And so we've included the final for fiscal year 2022, the proposed new budget for fiscal year 23. It's amended to what the board approved in June. And some things I wanted to point out to you, this includes the CAL FIRE grant, the full 3.25 million. If we don't do it all this year, we'll roll it over into next year. And I'm keeping this very high level. And so the impact of this is it'll reduce the fund balance by 4 million, because we're also we're under budgeting this year for a couple things. So we don't need to use the full rollover to make a balanced budget, if that makes sense.
And if I can just follow up with a couple of things, and Martina, FYI, Tom Finn just got into the attendees list, so we can move them over. You know, you can measure our much of our effort is a direct correlation to the amount of money that was spent, and underspending by 4.5 million actually exceeds the expectations that I had going into this fiscal year, given the bandwidth we had within the MWPA and also the bandwidth within our member agencies. And I wanted to talk about some of the spots where we underspent, and actually there were purposeful underspends, and in some cases by a large amount of money. And one of the main categories is the evacuation study. You see that we underspent by $814,000. And that was by design. That was a $1 million placeholder that we put in our very first fiscal year, and we've been rolling over until we initiated that evacuation risk assessment, which started at the very tail end of the fiscal year. So that was a planned underspend. And then chipper days, there is some purposeful underspending in there to carry over into the next fiscal year, so that we don't have to make an adjustment late in the year to start our spring chipper days. And also being underspent is allowing us for another month of chipper days in October, which wasn't originally planned. And so that is just a testament of how hard our chipper days folks have been working to stay within that budget. We also significantly underspent in grants, but we're catching up this year, as you'll find out in our next staff report. And that was really, we didn't get the grant program up and running and well publicized until we got into the second half of the fiscal year. So again, that was an anticipated underspend. So our underspends, I estimate 1.2 to 1.5 million of the underspend of the 4.5 was actually anticipated, or had we that was the plan going into the fiscal year. So when I look at the projects that have been done across the 5 zones, and then also JPA wide, I think we had some tremendous successes with our projects that got implemented. Each zone had significant success, if not multiple successes. And some of the delays that we had for either shaded fuel break work or evacuation route work was because the environmental compliance didn't get completed until late in the fiscal year. We actually approved 23 projects within environmental compliance last year, which is a tremendous number, but many of them came in late in the year. I do think it's good to note that we spent 84% of our administrative budget, so we are meeting the guidelines of the taxpayers to be lean within our administrative budgeting. And With that, I do want to point out that we have one slight conflict. In attachment B, you see that we are rolling over 814,000 in the evacuation study. However, in attachment C, where you see the specific spreadsheet, the number got transposed and it shows being rolled over into environmental compliance rather than the evacuation study. And the correct column is the evacuation study, so that we bring that total up to cover the entire cost. And with that, Lisa and I are available for questions.
Stephen?
Thank you for this, and it's very clear. I guess my only question is, with the rollover going forward this fiscal year, do you have the bandwidth to spend the funds that you've got?
I believe we do. Both the MWPA and I think our member agencies have reached that tipping point where we have the staff on board to keep the work going. And again, many of the projects were due to the environmental compliance coming late in the fiscal year. So I'm optimistic for next year that our project completion percentage will go up compared to this year.
I have oh, go ahead, Tom.
This is maybe a hyper technical question, but do we have a GAN limit issue here in that we have appropriated tax dollars in excess of what our needs are? And do we need to, I'm not, let me back up and say, it's not that we don't need it. It's just that sometimes you have to adjust your budget officially to match your revenues. Otherwise you will have an excess amount. And I do believe, although I'm not sure, that joint powers authorities are considered a local government unit or a government unit that may be subject to the GAN limit. And it may not, I may be off base here, but I'm just.
I have an easy answer for you on that one, Tom. And it's a great comment, a great point. In fact, we did analyze that in September of 2020 and had a legal counsel review of it, and we are exempt from the GAN limit.
Perfect. Good question.
Yeah, that's why we looked into it.
I have a follow-on question. There are a couple of times where there's rollover where there's no previous budget.
And that was by design, where a member agency knew that they had that project, and they're simply, when they went into the planning for fiscal year 22-23 in the work plan, they knew that they were going to have that rollover. Therefore, they had zero budget, but had the placeholder available for when the rollover came.
Okay, great. And then the second, when we report this out at the board level, it might be helpful to show rollover by zone, if that's possible.
You bet.
I think there's a story. Maybe there's a story, maybe there's not a story in terms of the areas where there's the most rollover. Because that might tell us either where we might need to put additional resources in terms of getting that work done.
Absolutely.
Mark, I have a question. It's not as fiscal as it is operational. So we're well into our, finished our second year, moving into our third year, and we're launching all these projects throughout the county. I haven't counted them all, but are there, and maybe this is for Jason and others, but what's your sense of the availability of not just workforce that we control, but contractors that are available to respond in a timely manner to get the work done that we need? Is that an issue? Are there any issues around that, or is that something we just want to kind of pause and take a look at here in another year?
I can offer my observations so far and then let Jason weigh in, but we've anticipated that bandwidth problem within either local agencies or with private contractors, but quite frankly, we haven't hit that threshold yet where we are seeing delays due to unavailability of private contractors. And I think part of it is the relationships that were established with many of our private contractors that are local. Actually, before the MWPA even came about, that has enticed the local contractors to stay available for our work. But Jason, have you heard of any delays as well, or at all?
I mean, I think to no surprise, as the economy is booming, the labor shortages are driven by that. We have some surge coming. The Fire Foundry is an example of our ability to add to the workforce, and then the expansion of our fire crew programs on the government side. And then I think, frankly, with the contraction of the economy, and we're usually a little delayed to see those kind of things in the Bay Area, but as that job market tightens up a little bit, we'll have a little more capacity and hopefully a more competitive environment. I think some of the bigger challenges, Bruce, are surrounding actually contracting.
Yeah.
So as all the individual agencies have different contracting rules, that can be more challenging, I think, than actually accomplishing the execution of the work and getting it done. So I think where we can create efficiencies there, we'll see maximum benefit.
Oh, okay. I just think it's really good to keep our eye on that. And then secondly, as we mature, all of the polygons that we have on the map, all the non-shaded fuel break, shaded other work. I'm just interested from a management perspective, and Alyssa, maybe this is something that Mark and you can talk about, but I'm real interested in unit costs, and that we get an idea of costs associated with our initial management, and then subsequently every acre that we're treating here. I know that our system tracks the GPS, or exactly where it is, the polygons on the map, and then it gets put into a database for maintenance, and that we start to be thinking about years out, how many acres of maintenance out at what kind of cost. And I'm just really interested, Mark. I mean, we have a lot of money coming in, we have grants coming in, but unit costs for the purposes of project planning, and then secondly, maintenance burden, if you will, that we're building, that we're cognizant of that every year as we go into future project planning.
And we will reach out to our member agencies, because this last fiscal, the vast majority of the contracting was through our member agencies, and so they'll have the analysis of if it's evacuation routes, cost per mile versus shaded fuel break or non-shaded fuel break, cost per acre. And as well as I do, a lot of it's will depend on the fuel type.
Yes.
And as will the maintenance, but we do anticipate a drop in level of effort once we get into the maintenance mode. But you're absolutely right. Everybody is keeping maintenance on the forefront of their mind, especially where we do prescribed herbivory, and because that's typically going to be nearly an annual event. And so we are already seeing our member agencies actually go into the third year of maintenance on those projects. So we don't have the data right now for the analysis, but we will be computing that data.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Maybe that's something we can talk about in a strategic planning session sometime, this coming year, just to flesh this out in a little bit more detail. I'm asking a bit of a randomized set of questions to you. I apologize.
No worries.
Oh, that's good. Another thought on the worksheets, and this is on the the attachments, because I just want to make sure I'm understanding this correct. So the budget requested was for the FY23 budget, and then the rollover, and then the full revised budget is for the FY23 budget. Would it help to add in the FY22 budget so we know what was actually expended, based on the rollover? Because the rollover is not related to the budget requested, it's based on the FY22 budget allocation.
Well, the FY22 closed budget is included. Is that enough, or?
By the line item?
Yes, by budget line. So you can see the 814,000 in the evacuation study. That's what was underspent in fiscal year 22. So that's there line by line.
Right, and but what was the full budget for that?
Oh, that's there too, 916,000. So I forgot
I'm not
the,
looking in the right spot.
I forgot the footer, but it's on page 12. And it should say attachment A at the bottom. I'll fix that. But that's where a lot of the rollover numbers came from. That's where all.
Rachel, if I can just confirm what your question is. Are you talking about a version like on the core program rollover detail where you actually see the spreadsheet of project by project? Are you looking for that for fiscal year 21, 22?
Correct. So it would follow why the rollover. So explain why the rollover, whether a portion of the project amount that was allocated for the FY22 budget was rolled over or the full project was rolled over. Do you see where
I see what you're talking about. It's the attachment C. So the fiscal year 22 version of attachment C, whereas attachment C is fiscal year 23, that's inclusive of fiscal year 22 rollover. So you
Correct.
like to see the spending, the line by line spending by project for fiscal year 22 that created the rollovers are being represented on that next page. And we do have that spreadsheet, right, Elisa?
Yes, we do. I can add that. No problem.
Great, thank you. I think it just might help to explain what this rollover is, because I think in some cases, the project is actually underway and this is just some additional amount. And in some cases, it wasn't started.
Correct. And some projects just don't feel like fitting into our tidy little fiscal year that we create.
Correct. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. All right. Any other questions or thoughts? And so we're looking for a motion on this one?
Correct. That we, if you have any further direction that you've given to staff, which is you have a rollover by zone and then add fiscal year 22 spreadsheet. If there's any other budget adjustments that you would like to see, please provide that and then authorize us to prepare this packet for approval to the board.
Do you want to open this up for public comment? If there's any public, Martina, would you like to?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current item or on the action items section of the agenda, please go ahead and raise your hand in the reactions or press *9 if you're joining us by phone. You may then push *6 to unmute and mute yourself. And Chair Kurtz, I do not believe we have any public comments.
Okay. If Larry was in the room with us, he would just nod. All right, thank you. All right, back to the board, any other questions, thoughts, suggestions? All right, if not, can I get a motion, please? Tom, you're on mute.
I'm just looking for the
Sorry.
language.
Okay, would you like to make a motion?
I'll defer to Steven. Sounds like he's,
I'm trying to formulate it. If you're farther ahead of me, go right ahead. Basically,
I'm not.
I move that we accept the staff recommendation for the fiscal 22-23 rollover proposal as presented in the staff report.
With the modifications.
With the modifications agreed to by staff to be provided in the future.
I'll second.
First by Stephen, second by Tom. All in favor?
Aye.
Roll call? Yeah.
Oh.
I don't know. Want to do roll call?
I'll go really quickly. Member
Aye.
and Member Donahue,
You're muted, Kathy.
Member Don,
Aye.
there you go. Member Finn
Aye.
and Member Goins,
Aye.
Member Schwartz,
Aye.
Member Weber,
Aye.
Chair Kurt.
Aye, thank you. All right, moving on, next item. resident defensible space and home hardening grant funding.
Yes, thank you. When we went into our work plan process and budgeting process for this fiscal year, we didn't have a tremendous amount of experience of what our pace and scale of the home hardening defensible space grant program would be based on the limited time that we actually had it running last year after we built the system. So we didn't have a lot of experience on that. We also hadn't quite penetrated the market, so to speak, and got the resident knowledge of the program. And so we were reluctant to put a large amount of money, first of all, into the grant program, not knowing what its success was going to be. We also were following the process of using the percent revenue gained for each of the zones to spread out the monies for the grant program. So when we got the total grant amount for home hardening and defensible space through our fiscal planning, and this is for our resident grants, we went to 24.3% for Novato, 28.7% for San Rafael, 22.6% for Central Marin, 18.4% for Southern Marin, and 6% for West Marin. And that gives you that first table on the staff page where it lists how much was available for each zone. And you see that for defensible space, we had a total of 238,000 available. For home hardening, we had a total of 324,000. One of the reasons why we overfunded the home hardening is the grant threshold is much higher for the home hardening, is up to 5,000, whereas the defensible space is capped at $1,000 per residence. The next table, you'll see, you also see that we rolled over, or based on Southern Marin's request, they had a $100,000 grant project that was within the Southern Marin core. Rather than them managing their own grant program, they asked that we roll over that 100,000 into the Southern Marin. So that's why if you were trying to do the math of the percentages, I told you it's a little bit different than what you see on that table, is because of the addition of the 100,000. But as we work through our first quarter of the fiscal year, some of our zones are quickly outpacing the revenue that was provided to them based on those buckets. And you can see for Central Marin, they've actually exhausted their defensible space, and they're about 2.5 projects away from exhausting their home hardening. West Marin is about 50% in both of their buckets. Novato is at about 50% in their home hardening bucket, and San Rafael is close to exhausting and 50% based on home hardening and D space. So there are 2 options so that we can continue to fund grants. And I have a feeling we may need to use a blend of those options. One option that was proposed during the executive committee was, the language of the JPA is really designed to look at the entire JPA as a whole rather than 5 individual zones. But we also have the requirement of tracking that the 80% of the revenue was expended in the zone in which it was gained in. But we could still pool all of the money into one bucket and keep spending until it's completely exhausted, regardless of what those zone thresholds that we originally created. And then we automatically track through our grant program where this money is expended. So when we do the analysis for the 80% of revenue, we'll have the data to be able to do that. The second option would be to look at some core projects that have been underspent and transfer money from that core project into the grant program. And we would not want to make that type of decision without going back to the operations committee and have them review the work plan and see if there was any of those types of recommendations. And like I said, I think we may want to explore a combination of that, because if we do pool the money all into one bucket, staff expects that we would expend that amount in another quarter. So we would potentially exhaust all of our grant funds within the first half of our year. One thing to note is that last week we did apply for a $5 million grant through the U.S. Forest Service that has a 5-year period, and it would be for defensible space work. And if we receive that $5 million grant, then we would put that into the defensible space bucket for the entire jurisdiction. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Stephen?
Thank you for that. So, a few questions. It was interesting to hear that the defensible space cap is $1,000. Is that proving to be a sufficient incentive? Is it too early to tell whether people are willing to go through the hoops for $1,000 in certain communities?
I believe we that has been enough of an incentive for many of our residents. While some residents are maxing out 100,000, we are actually getting quite a few residents that are coming in at about half to 2/3 of that amount that we're actually granting them. So, and I, based on the success that we were having in almost D-Space is the one where we've been consistently nearly maxing out or getting to that 50% threshold for the zones that have that 50% threshold.
Okay. As you and your team learn and all the operations committee learns through this year, is there an opportunity to revisit the budget as a whole and look at allocating certain funds into these programs if they continue to prove consistently popular?
There is, we would want to engage the operations committee in that level of decision though, because they're the ones that are closest to that spending and know where they're succeeding within their zone. So I would not want to make that type of recommendation without convening the operations committee.
So that might be part of their discussion or agenda when they begin convening, what, in December or January?
In December.
Timeframe? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. We just voted to roll over $4 million into the fiscal year. Was any thought given to using some of that for these programs to buttress them?
Yes, and that's part of that option two that I discussed would be used to some of that. But again, I wouldn't want to do that without consulting the operations committee.
Okay. And then the staff report was maybe a little bit vague, or I didn't read it right. Is this pooling proposed just for this fiscal year as sort of an interim measure, or is it an ongoing recommendation from staff that pooling occur?
My recommendation is for this fiscal year only, and we would evaluate as we build the 23-24 work plan on how we want to address that based on what we learned from this fiscal.
Okay, so I would recommend as we go to vote on this, that language be specifically clarified in terms of it's for this fiscal year as opposed to an ongoing pooling approach.
Makes sense.
Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Stephen. Any other questions? Mark, in terms of the grants, the home hardening grants, I'm assuming they're being evaluated, but I'm not necessarily sure in terms of the biggest bang for the buck. Are they in the right areas? Are those grants being used? Because I want to make sure, I mean, everyone's can use the grants, right? So they're not identified like as but the ones where we're getting the home inspections that are critical that people do work, are those the ones that are getting the grants?
I would say so, and in large part due to where we've been focusing our inspections. We've been focusing our inspections in the higher risk areas. So, and looking at the analysis and the geospatial work, in the mind's eye, it looks like they're coming in at the right places.
Okay. I think that's something that we need to keep an eye on as well. And I know that, in terms of other areas across the county, and we have some communities that are fully embedded in wooded areas that I would think would need more help than other areas. All right.
Yeah, Rachel, that's a great question, and my thoughts are along the same line of interest as far as effectiveness. Dollars are one thing, and numbers of projects are another, but the outcome associated with that investment is critical to us declaring success. If when that's here in the next couple 3 decades, Frank, hopefully. But so, Mark, again, I know that we developed our strategic plan. We had specific goals and objectives, and we did have metrics. The outcome question, I think, is something that we really need to invest some time in, and you as staff, the operations folks, the ATC is making sure that we're overlaying areas where we've achieved desired objectives as far as defensible space, or the level of achievement. I think tracking that first, but and putting it on the map. And we have the CWPP that identifies every single parcel's risk here in Marin County, and that's a combination of the house itself and then the surrounding vegetation. So between the home hardening defensible space work we're doing, and then also the fuel break, the shaded fuel break work, I really want us to start changing colors on the map, and providing some numbers on numbers of parcels that have reduced from very high to high, or high to moderate to low. And I think, Rachel, these are issues maybe for us to discuss in another venue, but it's all wrapped together here.
So we actually do have a parcel level risk assessment ongoing now. Okay. That it's approved in the work plan for this fiscal. We have a beta test that's already been peer reviewed, and we're about to present to the board. Actually, the beta test was in Kentfield because that's where we had a large bolus of data within a concentrated area. And the risk assessment is a partnership between Willow Labs, and Willow Labs created the scoring mechanism for the decrease in structured nightability based on home hardening and defensible space work that we've done in comparison to historical data and testing data. STI was a partner in that to help with the work of analysis of the evacuation route clearing and the shaded fuel breaks. And then Fireside was a partner in that, providing the defensible space and home hardening data. And so like I said, we sent it to 4 different people for peer review. The peer reviews come back with some great feedback, mostly in the affirmative of the process that we have followed. And so now we're getting ready to roll that out throughout the JPA so that we can get that exact analysis that you're talking about. And it specifically focuses on what we've done in the home hardening and defensible space combined with all of our other work. So we're actually really excited about it.
So Mark, just to summarize then, the recommendation is a combination of 1 and 2. 1 is take the existing funds, pool them, and apply the grants appropriately, regardless of zone. But we have that 80% to make sure they're still covering within 80% of the zone, but really looking across all of the county to identify where the work needs to happen with these grants. And then the second part of that is potentially add additional funds to the home hardening defensible space grants. And that would need to be reviewed by the ops committee.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So with those 2, it's sort of 2 recommendations in 1, but it's how to do more with our grants. Our home hardening
simply with the clarification that it's for this fiscal year.
For this fiscal year. And I think we're evolving and changing it as we need to, as it goes along. So, all right, good. Any other questions or thoughts on that? All right. Larry, on the public side? Any questions?
If there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the current item, please raise your hand in the reactions or press *9 to raise your hand joining by phone. You may then press *6 to unmute yourself. And Chair Kurtz, it does not appear that we have any comments.
All righty. Any other comments from the board? No? Welcome a motion.
Rachel, I think you articulated it the best. Would you like to float a motion here?
All right. I'd like to make a motion to recommend, as proposed by staff, the 2 various options of pooling the grant funds with the caveat of 80% of the revenues generated for each operational zone, and then working with the ops committee for a transfer of funds from other core projects. to increase our capacity for home hardening and defensible space grants. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, and also this is for this fiscal year, FY23 fiscal year. Thank you. All right, roll call, please.
Absolutely. Member Burke,
Yes.
Member Donahue,
Aye.
Member Finn,
Aye.
Member Goins,
Aye.
Member Schwartz,
Aye.
Member Weber,
Aye.
and Chair Kurtz.
Aye. Great. Motion passes. Thank you. Okay. Where are we at? Committee members request future agenda items.
And I'll just use this opportunity as a reminder that we are targeting our December meeting for policy development. And this will be a good portion of it was policy development that we had already intended to work on. And then another portion of it is policy development based on the Citizens Oversight Committee annual report recommendations. And we've already received feedback for the ones that were appropriate with a task force that was a combination of the Advisory Technical Committee, Operations Committee, and some financial staff within our member agencies. So staff and I will be using the recommendations from that task force, the COC, and stuff that we already had on the slate to draft some policies for your review and feedback in December.
Okay. All right.
And I just have just one item. It's not a future agenda item, but I think for our fiscal discussions as we float the fact that we are indeed pursuing funding through either state or federal agencies, one thing I'm not hearing is grant match requirements and accounting for that. And I know that some are dollar for dollar, some are 80-20, 70-30, and some have no match requirement at all. But I do think it's important, Mark, that and Alyssa, that as we pursue these, first of all, we're clear that there is or is not a match requirement, how much it is, so that we can track it. I'm looking at 5.2 million. That's a lot of money, and I don't know if that's cooperative fire, but they used to have a dollar for dollar match. But and then for defensible space, to the term of the grant. Also, some are 3 year, some are 5 year, but if you could just please keep us informed as to the details associated with those grants, I think we need that information to make sure we're plugging it in appropriately in all of our accounting and tracking.
Absolutely.
It might be then along those lines to add a future agenda item for a grant review. And have a listing of the different grants and terms and matches and everything else. That would be helpful because I'm sure a lot goes into actually managing all these different grants and reporting.
Yes. Yep.
Great, thank you. Any other items for future agenda topics? All right, we do not currently have a date scheduled, so we will work on getting finding a date that works for everyone, but it will be in December, most likely the first 2 weeks.
I would anticipate the second week, which works well for us to get it onto the board of directors agenda for the third week.
All right, great. All right, and with that, I think we will adjourn.
Take
Thank
care,
you all.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye.